Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today, we're diving into transnational urbanism.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that cities aren't just shaped by what happens inside them, but by global forces and connections and flows of people, ideas, resources. It's really fascinating.
It really challenges the traditional view of cities as these isolated entities, just sort of doing their own thing.
Exactly.
When in fact they never have been. And making cities global,
The book we're looking at.
really pushes us to think about those external influences, the historical context, how cities become these points of intersection for global trends.
And they use some really interesting historical examples to illustrate this, from the development of high-tech suburbs to the complexities of slum clearance projects across different continents. So we'll see how those global forces play out in very different ways.
Yeah, one of the most surprising examples for me was the story of Sophia Antipolis in France. It was designed to be this
Silicon
Valley on the French Riviera.
Beautiful location, government backing. Why do you think it struggled to create its own startup culture?
I mean, you would think that would be kind of a recipe for success, but the book argues that one of the key factors was its isolation, both geographically and in terms of its connection to existing industries. So it was a bit like building a high-tech oasis in the desert.
I see. So simply trying to replicate a model doesn't always work. You need the right ecosystem.
You need the right ecosystem, the connections, the culture. That supports innovation.
Contrast that with Singapore.
Right.
Much more
deliberate.
Hands-on approach.
They didn't just build the infrastructure. They actively courted foreign investment, created tax incentives, invested in education, really built a skilled workforce.
Shaping the conditions for success.
Absolutely, and it paid off. Singapore is now a major global hub for technology and innovation. Really shows the importance of understanding the context, adapting these ideas to local conditions.
This reminds me of the section on slum clearance. Which we often think of as a local issue.
Right.
But
again,
making cities global
shows how these projects were often influenced by Cold War politics, international development agendas.
Take Ciudad Kennedy in Bogota, Colombia.
Massive housing project built in the 1960s.
With significant aid from the United States. So these geopolitical motivations behind these urban projects.
It wasn't just about improving housing conditions.
Exactly.
And it's a reminder that these global forces can have a profound impact on the lives of everyday people. In Ciudad Kennedy, residents faced challenges, limited job opportunities, inadequate infrastructure.
So they had to adapt, find ways to make it work.
Absolutely, that tension between top-down planning, the lived experiences of people on the ground.
The book makes a similar point about slum clearance in Manila. During the Marcos regime, became a tool for controlling political unrest, displacing communities, disrupting their lives.
Yeah, it wasn't about improving their living conditions. It was about consolidating power.
Right.
So it raises important ethical questions about the role of urban planning and who benefits from these large-scale interventions.
Another thing that struck me was how the book explores the power of language itself.
Oh, that's such a crucial point. The book dives into how terms like suburb, colony, traveled from England to India and took on entirely new meanings.
Reflecting cultural nuances, historical context.
Yeah.
So it's like those words
like vessels,
become vessels for carrying ideas across borders. But those ideas transform. They take on new lives.
They do. They take on new lives in different settings. Making cities global really argues that understanding those subtle shifts in meaning is essential for effective urban planning and policymaking.
It's not just about the physical structures. It's about the language we use to describe them, the stories we tell about them, how those narratives shape our perceptions.
And that's where the book's discussion of digital history becomes so fascinating. It explores how interactive maps and data visualizations and digital archives can reveal hidden patterns and provide new insights.
It's like having a time machine for cities.
It is.
You can peel back the layers of history, see how they've evolved.
They talk about some fantastic projects like mapping inequality, showing how redlining shaped American cities, digital Harlem, documenting the history of that iconic neighborhood.
So we've covered a lot of ground here in this first part.
Yeah.
From high-tech suburbs to slum clearance, to the power of language, to the possibilities of digital history. But there's so much more to explore.
There's so much more.
In making cities global.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface. The book also delves into condo malls, the impact of universities on surrounding neighborhoods, the cultural dynamics of a transnational Independence Day parade.
This rich tapestry of examples and insights creates this compelling argument for why understanding cities means looking beyond their borders, recognizing their place in this globalized world. Condo malls.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned that earlier. That chapter really piqued my curiosity.
It's a fascinating phenomenon.
It's not something I'd ever really considered.
Yeah.
But it makes sense in a globalized world,
Right.
Real estate.
Right.
Investment flowing across borders.
The book focuses on Pacific Mall in Toronto, which is like a prime example of this model that originated in Asia. And what's really intriguing is how it's become more than just a shopping center.
Right.
It's a social and cultural hub for the Chinese community, almost like a modern-day Chinatown.
Challenging our traditional ideas of what a mall can be.
It's not just about consumerism. It's about community building, cultural expression in this transnational context.
The book contrasts Pacific Mall with another condo mall in Toronto called Remington Centre.
Right.
And it targets a more upscale mainstream market.
Right.
So even within this specific category, the condo mall.
There's a lot of diversity, adaptation happening.
These global trends are never monolithic. They're always being localized, reinterpreted, reshaped, based on those specific cultural and economic contexts.
Absolutely.
So that brings us back to the importance of understanding the historical context of urban development. And the book does a great job of showing how past decisions, events, continue to shape the cities we live in today.
The chapter on Arbol Verde in Southern California was a powerful example of that.
This barrio that's caught in the shadow of the expanding Claremont colleges, leading to displacement, a sense of loss for longtime residents.
It's a poignant story, raises important questions about gentrification, the role of these powerful institutions, the impact of urban renewal on marginalized communities.
And it's not just a local story. It speaks to these larger forces that are reshaping cities all over the world, where global capital and development interests often clash with the needs and aspirations of local communities.
The book also highlights the role of universities in shaping urban landscapes, both positively and negatively. In the case of Arbol Verde, the expansion of Claremont McKenna College led to tensions, displacement. But in other cases, universities can be anchors for revitalization, economic growth.
It's a complex relationship.
It is a complex relationship. And I think it underscores the need for more inclusive and equitable approaches to urban development that really considers the interests of all stakeholders.
Speaking of complex relationships, the chapter on the development of high-tech suburbs in Bangalore, India.
Oh, that was a really insightful chapter, showing how these global ideas about innovation and economic growth are translated and adapted in different contexts.
I was really struck by the role of Ascendus, which is a Singaporean company, in developing the International Tech Park Bangalore. So it's almost like this chain reaction of global influences, Singapore's own experience, and state-led development shaping the trajectory of a high-tech hub in India.
It's a great example of how interconnected these processes are. And I think it also highlights the often invisible hand of the state in shaping these supposedly free market landscapes. Even in this age of globalization, governments play a crucial role in attracting investment, building infrastructure, creating the conditions for economic growth.
That public-private interplay is something we see time and again in the book.
Absolutely.
Cities are not just products of market forces. They're also shaped by policy decisions, political agendas, the actions of powerful actors.
The book really encourages us to think critically about those power dynamics and to consider who benefits from these different models of urban development.
One of the things that really resonated with me throughout the book was this idea of transnational performance, how immigrants adapt and reinterpret cultural practices from their home countries and their new urban environments.
That chapter on the India Independence Day parade in Chicago was such a vivid illustration of that concept.
It's not just a celebration of Indian culture, but it's really a microcosm of the neighborhood's diversity, the complexities of immigrant identity, this ongoing negotiation of belonging in this transnational context. The parade takes place on Devon Avenue, often called Little India. But the book points out that label is an oversimplification.
Right. I mean, there are people from different regions of India, different religions, socioeconomic backgrounds, and the parade reflects that diversity, with floats representing businesses, religious institutions, cultural groups, even local politicians.
I love the example of the man dressed as Jesus, who's part of the parade.
Yeah.
He's from a Syrian Christian community in India, and his presence in this predominantly Hindu event really speaks to the hybridity, the fluidity of identity in this globalized world.
Yeah, I mean, it really challenges those simplistic notions of assimilation or cultural homogeneity that we often associate with immigrant communities.
It's about recognizing those multiple layers of belonging and the creative ways in which immigrants navigate those different worlds, shaping the urban landscape in the process.
And that's a theme that runs throughout Making Cities Global, recognizing the human side of urban development, the stories of the people who live and work in these spaces, the ways in which they shape and are shaped by global forces.
The book doesn't shy away from the challenges of urban development either. Inequality, gentrification, displacement of communities.
The story of Ciudad Kennedy, for instance, highlights the limits of top-down planning, the importance of understanding the real needs and experiences of residents. You know, in many ways, it's a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of well-intentioned interventions.
And the chapter on favelas in Brazil during the Cold War era shows how global politics can have this direct impact on local urban development.
In Rio de Janeiro, there was this concerted effort to eradicate favelas, viewing them as hotbeds of communism and social unrest, almost a form of social control disguised as urban renewal.
It's a reminder that cities are not just neutral spaces. They're arenas where power dynamics play out,
right?
Where social inequalities are magnified, where global forces intersect with local realities.
Making Cities Global challenges us to think critically about those dynamics and consider how we can create more just and equitable cities for the future.
A call to look beyond the obvious, to question our assumptions, and to recognize the interconnectedness of urban spaces across time and place.
And it's a reminder that understanding cities requires a multidisciplinary approach, drawing on history, sociology, economics, politics, even cultural studies.
And the book itself is a great example of that kind of interdisciplinary thinking.
Absolutely.
Weaving together diverse perspectives and examples to create this rich and nuanced understanding of urban development in this globalized world. One of the most eye-opening things in the book for me was how those simple words, suburb, colony, can carry such different meanings in different contexts.
Oh, absolutely. That chapter really resonated with me too. Language isn't neutral. It shapes our perceptions, even influences how cities are planned and developed, like the book's example of colony in India. Fascinating.
Yes.
In the West, we associate it with colonialism, overseas territories. But in India, it's often used to refer to planned housing developments, particularly for the middle class.
So much context matters when we talk about urban issues.
It does. What might seem straightforward in one place can have entirely different connotations in another.
And Making Cities Global argues that understanding these nuances of language is crucial.
It is, for effective planning and policymaking.
Yeah, if you're using terms that don't resonate with the local community, your plans are likely to miss the mark. Speaking of missing the mark, the book highlights how housing projects, often intended to alleviate poverty, can sometimes have unintended consequences.
We talked about Ciudad Kennedy, but the book also delves into the history of favelas in Brazil, which were often viewed as eyesores or threats to social order. During the Cold War, there were even attempts to eradicate them, driven by these fears of communism and social unrest.
Urban planning can be used as a tool for social control.
Absolutely, sometimes exacerbating inequalities rather than addressing them.
Underscores the need for more inclusive, participatory approaches to urban development, where residents have a voice.
They need to have a voice in shaping the future of their communities.
One of the things I appreciate about Making Cities Global is that it doesn't shy away from these difficult conversations about power, inequality, the challenges of urban development.
Challenges us to think critically about the forces shaping our cities, to consider alternative models that prioritize social justice and sustainability.
And it reminds us that cities are constantly evolving.
They are?
They're dynamic spaces, shaped by both global trends and local initiatives, by grand visions and everyday actions.
That's where the book's discussion of digital history comes in. It's not just about preserving the past, it's about using digital tools to understand the present, envision the future of our cities.
I was really fascinated by the concept of thick mapping, which goes beyond simply showing the physical layout of a city. Layers in historical data, social and cultural information, even personal narratives, creates a much richer and more nuanced understanding of place.
Adds depth and texture to the urban fabric, allows us to see the city through multiple lenses.
The book highlights some amazing projects, like mapping inequality, reveals the history of redlining, and then Digital Harlem,
Right.
documenting that vibrant cultural history of that iconic neighborhood.
These projects demonstrate the power of digital tools to make history come alive, engage a wider audience in exploring urban issues.
Making Cities Global concludes with a call to action, urges us to embrace new ways of thinking about and researching urban history, use those insights to address contemporary challenges, and create more just and equitable cities for the future.
For the future, yeah.
So, if you're at all interested in exploring the complexities of urban development in this globalized world, I highly recommend checking out Making Cities Global.
I do too. It's thought-provoking, insightful, challenge your assumptions about cities, inspire you to look at the urban landscape with fresh eyes.
It's a valuable resource for students, urban planners, policymakers, anyone who's curious about the forces shaping the cities we live in. So that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Making Cities Global. We hope you found this exploration insightful and thought-provoking. If you're interested in reading the book, be sure to subscribe to this channel, and you can purchase it via the link in the description. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new and fascinating topic. Until then, happy exploring.